Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe my channel. The air left my lungs so fast it felt like a fist had gone straight through my ribs when my mother slid the cream-colored envelope across the polished mahogany and said, loud enough for the entire dining room to hear, "Open it, Nathaniel." The chandelier above us threw a soft gold sheen over the silver coffee service, over the bone china plates, over the embossed family crest on the envelope she'd placed directly on top of my untouched lemon tart. The paper was thick, expensive. The kind that made a faint crackle when you bent it. My mother, Vivian Sterling, sat at the head of the table in a pearl-white suit with her hands folded so neatly it looked rehearsed. Gregory Hale, her husband, leaned back with two fingers hooked over the rim of a low-ball glass, his jaw already set in that smug, paternal angle he used whenever he wanted to sound reasonable before saying something ugly. My younger sister, Camille Sterling, kept one hand on the stem of her water glass and the other flat against the tablecloth, eyes bright with the tense excitement of someone who had come for a performance and knew the opening line was about to land. Martin Heller, the family attorney, had his leather folio open beside his bread plate, not eating, not drinking, just waiting. I opened the envelope. Inside was a 9-page invoice. At the top, in sharp serif font, above line items and dates and subtotals, was one centered line. Cost of raising a failure. For a second, the fluorescent spill from the kitchen beyond the archway seemed too bright, too clinical, like the whole room had become an operating theater and I was the thing laid open on the table. My name is Nathaniel Sterling. I'm 34. And this is the story of how my mother tried to invoice me out of my own life, and how I turned one photograph into the end of hers. I didn't look up right away. That disappointed her. Vivian liked an instant reaction. She liked flinches. Silence, when it came from anyone but her, made her impatient. Read the total, she said. I let my thumb move down the page. Boarding school tuition reimbursement. Piano instruction. Orthodontics. A laptop from 2008. Soccer camps I'd never attended. Emergency counseling on 3 separate dates. Household strain differential. That one almost made me smile. At the bottom, just above her signature, the number sat there in bold. $347,218.44. Camille let out a breath through her nose. Honestly, she said, not to me but to the room, it's not even unfair. Gregory swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Your mother has supported you for years, he said. At some point, accountability becomes appropriate. Martin adjusted one of the papers in his folio without meeting my eyes. This is, in part, a formal demand, he said. There are estate matters pending and Mrs. Sterling thought clarity would be useful. Clarity. That was the word they used whenever they wanted to turn humiliation into administration. I looked up then and the first thing I noticed was how prepared they all were for me to break. Vivian's chin was lifted a fraction too high. Gregory's mouth already had the shape of a sympathetic sigh. Camille's posture was composed, but her knee bounced once under the table and tapped the wood. Martin had brought witness copies. They hadn't come to talk. They had come to watch. This, my mother said, pressing her fingertips against the linen, is what you cost. Since you've chosen to drag your father's estate through court rather than let this family move on, I thought it was time you understood something very basic. You have always taken more than you gave. There was not grief, not concern. The real point. 3 weeks earlier, I had filed a petition to compel a full accounting of the Sterling Family Trust after certain reimbursements around my late father's care began not adding up. I hadn't gone public. I hadn't accused anyone directly. I had simply asked for the numbers. In my family, asking for numbers was treated like arson. Vivian went on, her voice smooth and cold. You were not denied. You were not neglected. You were funded. Thoroughly. And yet at 34, instead of gratitude, you offer litigation. Audit, I said evenly. A lawsuit, Camille snapped. You're trying to make us sound criminal. No, I said. I'm trying to understand the books. Gregory leaned forward, forearms on the table, cufflinks catching the chandelier light. Let's stop pretending, he said. Your father indulged you. He paid for every false start. The gallery internship in Tribeca. The graduate program you abandoned. The apartment deposit in Gramercy. The 6 months you spent finding yourself after the divorce. I turned my head slowly toward him. I've never been divorced. A thin flush climbed his neck. You know what I mean. That got a laugh from Camille. Short. Nervous. Pooh. My mother slid a second page toward me with one manicured finger. You'll also see attached a proposed waiver. Sign away any further claim against the estate, and I'll consider the matter settled. There was the trap beneath the insult. Public shaming with a legal tale. I picked up the waiver and scanned it. Waiver of claim, waiver of inquiry, waiver of future challenge, confidentiality clause, mutual non-disparagement drafted in a way that protected only them. Martin had been busy. Aunt Joanna Voss appeared in the doorway then, silk scarf draped around her shoulders, carrying a dessert fork she'd forgotten to bring in with the others. She took in the scene in one practiced glance and stayed. Of course she stayed. Joanna never missed blood in the water. She rested a hand on the back of Camille's chair and said, "Is it done?" "Almost," Vivian said. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the refrigerator compressor kick on in the kitchen. I could hear a spoon settle against porcelain. I could hear Gregory's wedding band tap the glass once. Vivian folded her hands. "If you want to know why your father grew tired of defending you, Nathaniel, it's because even he eventually understood the truth. Some investments never return value." That line had weight to it. She had saved it. Camille lowered her eyes in what I think she believed was elegance. Gregory watched me with the alert stillness of a man waiting for a dog to bite so he could claim he'd been right all along. Martin finally looked up, but only briefly. He had the tight face of someone who knew the room he was sitting in and the room he would later describe were not going to be the same. I placed the invoice flat on the table and smoothed one edge with my palm. "Do you want to contest any item?" Martin asked, mistaking calm for confusion. "No," I said. Camille blinked. "Wait. That's it." I lifted the last page again, taking my time. Boarding school. Piano. Orthodontics. Counseling. Gramercy deposit. Household strain differential. The number again. $347,218.44. It was almost elegant in a monstrous way. My mother watched my face. "You can glare at me if it makes you feel better." "I'm not glaring." "Then what are you doing?" I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, took out my phone and photographed the invoice. First page. Last page. Signature block. Vivian's expression changed first. Not fear. Not yet. Just irritation at losing control of the moment. "You don't get to document private family business," Gregory said sharply. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. "You invited a lawyer to brunch," I said. "That ended private." Martin cleared his throat. "Nathaniel, I would advise." "I'm sure you would." Joanna straightened. Camille's knee stopped bouncing. My mother's voice sharpened. "Are you planning to embarrass us with this?" I stood, folded the waiver once and set it beside Martin's folio. "No," I said. "I was hoping you'd put it in writing." No one spoke. I buttoned my jacket. Gregory half rose from his chair, then sat back down when he realized I was leaving without haste, without raised voice, without giving them the scene they had laid the table for. Vivian's hand tightened around her water glass. "If you walk out now, don't expect another invitation into this home." I looked at her. Really looked at her. At the perfect lipstick. At the pearl earrings my father bought her in Venice on their 20th anniversary. At the absolute confidence with which she had spent my entire life deciding what I was allowed to remember. "I didn't come for lunch," I said calmly. "I came for the number." Then I left her with the invoice, the untouched tart, and the first real silence that room had heard in years. Outside, the October air was thin and cold. The limestone steps of the townhouse held the last of the afternoon warmth under the soles of my shoes. Across the street, a black town car idled under bare plane trees. I walked past it, down the block, and didn't check my phone until I reached the corner of 72nd and Madison. I had 13 missed calls by then. All from Camille. Not Vivian. Not Gregory. Camille. I smiled. 3 months earlier, before the petition, before the brunch, before my mother decided to turn motherhood into a collection notice, I had unlocked a safe deposit box at First National on Lexington with a key I found taped under the bottom drawer of my father's desk. He'd been dead for 11 months. Samuel Sterling had built Sterling Urban Holdings from one city contract and a borrowed line of credit into a real estate portfolio that fed half the museums and schools my mother liked to be photographed supporting. To the public he was flint and polish. To me he had been quieter than people expected. He never made speeches at home. He never needed the room turned toward him. But he kept everything. Contracts, memos, birthday cards, old menus with phone numbers written on the back. He believed records were a form of memory, and memory was the only asset people tried hardest to steal. The safe deposit box contained a leather document pouch, 3 cashier's checks that had never been cashed, a slim silver flash drive, and a stack of Polaroids from the early 90s bound with a cracked rubber band. On top of everything was a note in his handwriting. If Vivian ever asks you for a number, ask her where she got it. That was all. No explanation. No apology. No dramatic confession from the grave. Just a sentence. My father had never wasted words. The flash drive held scanned trust ledgers, reimbursement schedules, wire confirmations, and internal accounting memos dating back 17 years. It took me 2 nights and 2 bottles of terrible diner coffee to understand what I was looking at. It took me another week to stop feeling the old, familiar pull to minimize it. To tell myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. That there always was. There wasn't. Every line on the invoice my mother had just handed me existed in those files already. Same dates. Same labels. Same odd phrasing. Same total. The first time I saw the number $347,218.44 on my laptop screen in my apartment in Red Hook, it sat in a spreadsheet line marked, Reimbursement to V. Sterling, Dependent Care and Household Burden Offset, charged to NS Custodial Reserve. I stared at it until morning. The bill my mother had just handed me at brunch wasn't an estimate of what I had cost to raise. It was the exact amount she had already taken from me. By the time I reached the end of the block, Camille was calling again. I let it ring out. Then I opened my messages, selected Vivian's contact, and attached a single photograph. Not a paragraph. Not a threat. Not even a caption. Just the image. It was a photo I had taken of one ledger page from the safe deposit box files. The page showed 3 columns and 1 line highlighted in pale yellow. Date: November 14, 2013. Transfer: $347,218.44. Notes: reverse charge to Nathaniel Reserve pending SAM review. Initials beside it in blue ink. Vis. I hit send. The message showed delivered. Her reply came 21 seconds later. Where did you get that? No period. No elegance. No control. Then Gregory. Call me now. Then Martin. I think it would be wise if we discuss this before making assumptions. Then finally Vivian again. You have no idea what you're looking at. I stood on the corner while taxis hissed through damp leaves and pedestrians flowed around me in coats and scarves and small private urgencies. Above the avenue, the light had gone pale silver against the glass towers, and for the first time since my father's funeral, my pulse felt steady. I typed 4 words. I know exactly enough. I put my phone away and kept walking. By the time I got home, Gregory had called twice more, Martin had left 1 voicemail, and Camille had switched from outrage to panic. Nate, pick up. Seriously. Mom is freaking out. I set my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door and hung my coat carefully. My apartment was small, all exposed brick and steel-framed windows, the floor scarred in places where some long-gone machine had once been bolted down. The late afternoon light came in flat and cool over the concrete countertop. I liked that it told the truth. Nothing in that apartment tried to flatter itself. My phone rang again. This time it was Vivian. I answered on the 4th ring. For 2 seconds neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Come back." It wasn't a request. No. You stole private financial material. Did I? You had no right to go through your father's things. I walked to the kitchen sink and poured myself a glass of water. Interesting argument, I said. Given that your bill appears to come from my custodial records. Her inhale caught. Small. So she knew. Not suspected. Knew. Those were household allocations, she said. That money was used in the ordinary course of raising you. Then why bill me for it now? That isn't the point. It feels like the point. Gregory's voice sounded in the background, too muffled to make out. A chair scraped. Camille said something fast, breathless. Martin, lower and steadier, kept trying to get someone to stop talking. Vivian came back on. You need to bring me every copy you have. Why? Because you don't understand how these structures work. I understand enough to know that if you charged my trust for my expenses, then presented the same figure to me as a personal debt in the middle of pending probate, you've done something very careless. You ungrateful. No, I said quietly. Careless. She went silent. I could picture her perfectly. Standing now, one hand braced on the back of her dining chair, rings flashing under the chandelier, trying to decide whether force or charm would serve her better. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped into the register she used for donors and grief receptions and public forgiveness. Nathaniel, your father and I had complex arrangements. Some things were done for tax efficiency. Some things were moved on paper that weren't meant to be interpreted literally. Martin can explain that. That sounds useful for Martin, I said. A beat. Then Martin himself came on the line. Nathaniel, let's lower the temperature. It isn't high on my side. I'd like to suggest we meet privately. This evening. No dramatics. I took a sip of water and leaned against the counter. No. Nathaniel. I'm not coming back to the townhouse. Then where? You can come to me. He hesitated. They all did in different ways whenever they had to step into a place they didn't curate. When, he asked. 7. We'll be there. No, I said. Not we. You, Vivian, and Gregory. If Camille comes, she listens. If Joanna comes, I leave. Understood. Martin paused, recalculating the room. Understood. I ended the call. Then I did 3 things. First, I printed the ledger page my mother had just seen. Then I printed the reimbursement schedule from 2011 through 2018, the trust disbursement summary, and the internal memo from Sterling Urban Holdings showing the company had already paid my school expenses directly during several of those same years. Second, I texted a woman named Serena Klein. I have the invoice. Same number. Her reply came 1 minute later. Good. Don't explain. Don't negotiate. Let them talk. Serena Klein had been a senior litigator at Archer Vale before opening her own boutique firm in Midtown. More importantly, she had once represented one of my father's partners in a minority shareholder dispute so brutal it became required reading in certain very expensive conference rooms. My father respected few lawyers. He respected her. And third, I pulled a small digital recorder from my desk drawer, changed the batteries and set it on the bookshelf beside the turntable. Not hidden. Not flaunted. Present. At 6:58 the buzzer sounded. When I opened the downstairs door remotely and heard their shoes on the steel stairs, I felt nothing dramatic. No rush. No tremor. Just attention. Vivian entered first because of course she did, wearing a camel coat over the pearl suit, posture still immaculate, mouth compressed into a line so straight it looked drawn with a ruler. Gregory followed, shoulders square, performing irritation as if it were masculine competence. Martin came after them, carrying a folio and a new expression. It was the expression of a man beginning to suspect that one careless document had just become several billable years of regret. Camille came last in a cream sweater and boots, no makeup except mascara, face pale with the dawning horror of someone who thought humiliation was a party trick until she saw the machinery behind it. My apartment suddenly felt very quiet. The pendant light over the kitchen cast a clean pool over the concrete island. The brick walls held the dusk. From somewhere outside came the distant groan of a truck on wet pavement. No one is sitting in my bedroom, I said. You can take the table. Vivian looked around once, fast and dismissive. You live like this by choice? Yes. That explains a lot. Not tonight, Vivian, Martin said. That startled me. Not because he said it. Because he used her first name. I gestured toward the table. Gregory sat heavily, knees wide, claiming space he hadn't earned. Camille perched on the edge of a chair with her coat still on. Vivian remained standing until I sat first. Only then did she lower herself opposite me, laying her gloves beside her phone with deliberate precision. Martin stayed half-turned, one hand on his folio as if he expected to leave in a hurry. You sent my mother stolen records, Gregory said. I slid the printed invoice across the table until it reached the center. Then I laid the highlighted ledger page beside it. No, I said. I returned one. Camille's eyes moved from one page to the other. Then back again. Her lips parted. They matched perfectly. Same amount. Same rhythm of line items. Same invented language. Even the bizarre phrase household burden appeared in both places. Martin leaned closer. I watched him see it. Watched his pupils narrow. Watched the blood leave his face in a clean, visible drain. That's not possible, Gregory said. It is, I said. Vivian didn't touch the pages. She kept both hands in her lap, fingers locked together so tightly the knuckles had gone white. This document is incomplete, she said. It's 1 page of 6. Then you're missing context. I have the rest. Silence. I opened a thin black binder and turned it toward them. Let's be methodical. That was the moment the room changed. People think power shifts happen in grand declarations. They don't. They happen when one person stops performing emotion and starts laying out sequence. I took the first page from the binder. Your invoice says you personally covered tuition for Blackwood Academy in 2007 and 2008. I placed a second document beside it. Sterling Urban Holdings paid Blackwood directly on August 3, 2007, and July 29, 2008. Here are the wire confirmations. Gregory leaned in. Camille's coat slipped from one shoulder. Martin reached for his glasses. I took another page. Your invoice says you paid for emergency counseling in February 2011. I placed the next record down. That charge was billed to the family insurance plan under your policy. It was then reimbursed from my custodial reserve 4 weeks later. So either you billed the insurer and my trust for the same session, or the session never happened. I'm open to which explanation you prefer. Camille looked up at her mother. Mom. Vivian ignored her. I took a third page. Your invoice says you advanced the deposit on my Gramercy apartment in 2014. Then I laid down the bank confirmation. The deposit came from an account in my father's name. You reimbursed yourself from my custodial reserve 18 days later. Gregory sat back hard enough that his chair gave a small bark against the floor. You little bastard, he said. No, I said. Actually, you were committing fraud. The silence that followed had weight. It settled over the table and into the corners of the room until even Gregory seemed to hear himself. Camille swallowed. Martin rubbed a thumb once over the edge of his folio, a nervous motion so small I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for signs of fracture. Vivian finally placed her palms on the table and leaned forward. You are taking internal household reimbursements and recasting them as theft because you want leverage in the estate dispute. This is pathetic. I turned another page. This is an internal memo from your office dated March 12, 2016, I said. Subject line, use prior dependent language. It instructs accounting to replicate descriptions from old reimbursements when Nathaniel Reserve cleanup is finalized. Martin's head snapped toward Vivian. I haven't seen that. Her eyes flicked to him. Tiny. Fast. But enough. No, I said. I didn't think you had. Gregory jabbed a finger at the paper. Where did you get these? From the place my father left them. That landed differently. Not because of the records. Because of the implication behind them. My father had not trusted what would happen after he died. Camille's voice came out thin. Dad knew. I think, I said, Dad had questions. Vivian let out a small laugh that sounded almost normal if you didn't know what terror did to the edges of a voice. Nathaniel, for God's sake. Samuel questioned everyone. He kept files on grocery orders. Then you should have assumed he kept yours. Martin finally sat. Foley. I need to ask a very specific question, he said. Do you have the original digital archive? Yes. Is it in more than one place? Yes. That was the second moment the room changed. He understood then that this was no longer a family dispute that could be shamed into a hallway and muffled with old language. This was evidence with duplication. Which meant it had future tense. Vivian saw it too. I watched her shoulders pull back, watched her rebuild herself out of contempt because contempt had worked for her longer than truth ever had. What do you want? She asked. There was. Not denial. Terms. I folded my hands. Tonight. Nothing. Gregory barked a laugh. That's cute. No, I said. Listen carefully. The invoice you handed me at lunch is now a written demand for repayment of funds previously charged to my custodial reserve. That matters. The timing matters. The matching figure matters. The waiver matters. You built me an evidentiary bridge and walked halfway across it yourselves. Camille looked like she might be sick. Martin spoke very softly. Nathaniel, do not send anything further to anyone. I haven't. Good. Yet. Gregory stood. You're not blackmailing us. I stayed seated. If I were blackmailing you, Gregory, I'd ask for money. I'm asking for a forensic accounting, a preservation order, and a formal meeting with counsel. He stared at me. I let the implications settle over the room. Vivian's nostrils flared once. You rehearsed this. For 3 months. Camille turned to me fully for the first time that night. You knew she was going to do this? I knew she'd force the number into the open, I said. How? I looked at her. My sister. The golden child with my father's mouth and my mother's appetite for approval. She had laughed at brunch because laughter was the easiest way to stay safe in that house. I knew that. I also knew she had still laughed. I sent an email last week, I said. I asked for a complete explanation of any funds the family believed I owed before the trust hearing. I knew if your mother answered, she'd use the amount she'd already memorized. Camille stared. You baited her. I gave her room. Martin closed his eyes for 1 second. Only one. Jesus. Gregory rounded on Vivian. You told me this was symbolic. Vivian turned to him with killing calm. Because it was supposed to be. Martin said, I need copies of everything tonight. You'll get them through counsel, I said. He nodded once. No argument. Vivian rose. I am not going to sit in my son's warehouse apartment and be extorted by a man who has never built anything in his life. I stood too. Then don't. She grabbed her gloves. Gregory looked between us with the frantic energy of a man used to dominating weaker rooms and suddenly realizing this one had walls. Camille remained seated, staring at the papers. Martin collected nothing. He didn't dare touch the documents on my table without permission. At the door, Vivian stopped and turned back. If you do this, she said, you will destroy this family. No, I said. I'll document it. Her mouth twitched. Not with sadness. With rage held so tightly it had become elegant again. Then she left. Gregory followed in a storm of expensive wool and muttered threats. Martin lingered only long enough to say, have your lawyer contact me by 9 tomorrow. His voice was thinner than before. Camille was the last one in the room. She stood near the steel bookshelf with her coat hanging open and her hands clasped against her stomach. For the first time in years she looked younger than me. Not in age. In certainty. Did Dad really leave this for you? She asked. He left me enough. Her eyes went wet but she didn't cry. Sterling women learned early that tears were currency and should never be spent in the presence of a stronger bidder. Why didn't you tell me? I considered lying. Telling her I wasn't sure. That I wanted to protect her. But the truth was cleaner. Because I needed you to see them when they thought I had nothing. She flinched. Then she nodded once, like she had been slapped by a fact she already suspected. Mom's going to come apart, she whispered. Probably. And Gregory will make it worse. Yes. She looked at the invoice one last time. Then at me. I didn't know about the number. I know. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply true. She left without hugging me. When the apartment door shut, I stood alone in the quiet and looked at the papers spread across my table under the pendant light. The city outside had gone dark enough for the windows to become mirrors. In them I could see my own reflection layered over the room like a second witness. They thought they had embarrassed me into surrender, but they had no idea they had just authenticated the one figure that could collapse everything they built around it. The next morning at 9:12, Serena Klein walked into my apartment carrying 2 coffees and a legal pad. Serena was 51, sharp-eyed, silver at the temples, and so allergic to theatrics that people often mistook her courtesy for softness until they found themselves signing something under it. She wore navy wool, low heels, and the expression of someone who had already run 6 outcomes before breakfast. You look rested, she said, handing me a coffee. I slept 4 hours. For this family that counts. She moved to the table and reviewed the documents in silence. She didn't rush. She didn't speak to fill space. She just read, occasionally marking her pad with a pencil. Outside, the rain had started, streaking the window panes and turning the steel fire escape into a darker grid. After 10 minutes, she said, "This invoice was a gift. That's what I thought. It's better than that. Stupid. Stupid is always a gift. She tapped the signature line. She put her own hand on the exact figure. That is a very bad habit in very rich people. They start believing arrogance is a form of privilege. I leaned against the counter. Martin wants everything. Martin wants to survive this. Serena turned another page. We don't give him everything. We give notice. Preservation demand. Immediate request for court-supervised forensic review. And we choose the room. She glanced up. Tell me about the archive. I told her about the safe deposit box, the flash drive, the note from my father, the scan ledgers, the duplicate reimbursements, the internal memos. I told her about the language patterns, how the same odd descriptors repeated across years in ways no honest books ever repeated. I told her about the phone calls, the invoice, the waiver. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "There's one more thing." What? People don't write down theft for years without someone operational helping them. Someone processed this. Someone classified it. Someone protected the paper trail when it suited them and hid it when it didn't. You think there's an insider? I think there's always an insider. At 11 she sent the first letter. It went to Martin Heller and copied Vivian Sterling, Gregory Hale, Sterling Urban Holdings, and the trustees of the Sterling Family Trust. It demanded preservation of all digital and paper records related to reimbursements, dependent care allocations, custodial reserves, educational payments, insurance claims, estate distributions, and communications referencing my name from January 1, 2006, to present. It further advised that any deletion, alteration, or destruction would trigger immediate emergency relief. At 11:26, Gregory called me 6 times in a row. At 11:32, Camille texted, "He's screaming at everyone." At noon 15, an unknown number appeared on my screen. "Mr. Sterling?" a woman asked when I answered. "Yes. My name is Denise Holloway. I used to work for your mother." "Used to." I looked at Serena. She was across the room but saw my face change and set her coffee down. "I think," Denise said very carefully, "you should know your preservation letter arrived about 4 minutes before Gregory ordered the accounting closet cleared." Serena was beside me before I put the call on speaker. "Ms. Holloway," Serena said, "this is Serena Klein, counsel for Nathaniel Sterling. Are you in a safe place to speak?" Pause. Then, yes. Denise Holloway had worked for my family for 16 years. Officially, she was Vivian's executive assistant for foundation matters and household administration. In reality, she was the axle the entire machine turned on. Calendars. Stuff. Charitable seating charts. Vendor payments. Christmas cards. Dry cleaning. Quiet cover stories. She had once found my passport under a stack of architecture magazines when I was 19 and trying to leave for Barcelona without telling anyone. She had also once told me in a pantry while my mother hosted 72 people for a holiday dinner, that the fastest way to understand a family was to see who got thanked and who got blamed. "Why are you calling us?" Serena asked. Denise exhaled slowly. "Because yesterday Mrs. Sterling told Martin Heller that if this became public, she'd say any reimbursement irregularities were processed through my office without her review." Serena's tone didn't change. "Were they?" "No." "Can you prove that?" "Yes." My hand tightened around the phone. Denise continued. 4 years she had me prepare packets for signature. Some were routine. Some were marked private. When I started asking why dependent reimbursement language kept appearing on accounts that had already paid direct invoices, Gregory told me not to develop a conscience this late in life. Serena wrote something down. "And you kept copies." "I kept insurance. Mrs. Sterling taught me that." There was the insider. Denise told us she had preserved scanned email directives, approval chains, calendar notes tied to transfer dates, and most importantly photographs taken last month when Vivian ordered old archive boxes pulled from storage after receiving notice of the trust petition. Denise had been told to inventory them. Instead she photographed everything before it was moved. "There's one more thing," Denise said. "Go on," Serena said. "On the day your father had the second stroke, Mrs. Sterling and Mr. Heller met in the library at the townhouse. The door was half closed. I heard Mr. Heller say, 'If Sam signed anything moving the reserve back, we need to find it before Nate does.' For a moment no one in my apartment moved. Even rain seemed to quiet itself against the windows. Serena's pencil stopped. "Did you ever find such a document?" she asked. "No," Denise said. "But I found a routing slip from Samuel Sterling's office to First National Private Banking dated 2 days before his stroke. It referenced custodial reserve reconciliation materials. The bank. The box. My father had known the clock was running." Serena set the pencil down very gently. "Miss Holloway, I'm going to ask you a blunt question. If required, would you swear to this?" "Yes." "Why?" This time Denise didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice had thinned. "Because Mrs. Sterling fired me last week. No severance. No health continuation. Told staff I had become erratic. She was preparing to bury this under me. And because your father once told me in front of her that no one in that house got to use Nathaniel as a line item." I closed my eyes for 1 second. I could hear my father saying it. Not loudly. He never needed loud. Serena asked Denise to forward nothing directly yet, only to preserve all materials and meet us in person that afternoon. Denise agreed. When the call ended, Serena looked at me over the table of documents. "Well," she said. "Now we have motive, mechanism, and a witness with a pension grievance. That's almost rude." The next 48 hours moved fast. Serena filed emergency papers to freeze further discretionary trust distributions pending review. Martin countered with language about family privacy and misunderstanding. Gregory sent a text promising to burn every cent you think you're entitled to in legal fees. Vivian sent nothing at all, which meant she had moved from improvisation to strategy. By Wednesday, the meeting was set. Friday, 10 a.m. Klein Mercer LLP, 47th Street. Neutral ground, though nothing in Manhattan is ever neutral if enough money has polished the surfaces. I arrived 20 minutes early. The reception floor smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. The conference room Serena chose had smoked glass on one side, walnut paneling on the other, and a table so glossy it reflected the recessed lighting in clean, hard bands. The chairs were black leather. The water carafes were already filled. Authority lived in the details of rooms like that. They were built to make people tell the truth or at least pay for delaying it. Serena sat at the head of one side with a legal pad, a tabbed binder, and no wasted movement. Beside her was Owen Barrett, a forensic accountant she trusted, broad-shouldered, mild-voiced, and devastating in the way only men who can reduce your life to numbered flows tend to be. Denise Holloway sat farther down in a charcoal dress and navy coat, both hands wrapped around a paper cup she had not touched. She looked terrified. She also looked steady. At 10:03 the other side arrived. Martin entered first this time, which told me everything. His tie was slightly off-center. His briefcase looked heavier than usual, as if he believed documents could still serve as armor. Gregory followed with fury pulled tight over panic. Vivian came behind him in dark green silk and cream wool, immaculate as ever except for one detail. She no longer led with her chin. Camille came last in black, hair pulled back, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. They sat opposite us. For a few seconds no one spoke. The only sound was the soft click as Serena aligned the corners of one tab section with the edge of the table. Then she began. "This meeting is settlement-oriented," she said. "But let me be plain about the alternatives. We are here because last Sunday Mrs. Sterling delivered a written demand to my client for repayment of $347,218.44, described as the cost of raising him, during pending probate and immediately before requesting that he waive his rights to further inquiry. That amount precisely matches prior reimbursements charged to his custodial reserve. We also have documentary support suggesting many of those expenses had already been paid through other channels." She slid copies down the table. Martin did not touch his for a full 2 seconds. Owen took over. Calm. Methodical. He spoke the way surgeons do before an incision. No drama. Just steps. Item 1, he said. Blackwood Academy tuition 2007 and 2008. Paid directly by Sterling Urban Holdings, confirmed by wire records. Same expense later charged against Nathaniel Sterling's custodial reserve as dependent educational reimbursement. He placed the records in sequence. Item 2. Orthodontic Services 2009. Covered 80% by insurer, 20% paid from joint household account. Full cost later charged to custodial reserve. Next set. Item 3. Apartment deposit March 2014. Paid from Samuel Sterling's personal account. Reimbursed to Vivian Sterling from custodial reserve 18 days later. Next. Item 4. Counseling sessions listed in February and April 2011. No matching provider records in preserved family files. Corresponding reimbursement entries nonetheless processed. Next. He kept going. By item 7, Gregory's face had gone ruddy around the ears. By item 9, Camille had both hands flat on the table, staring at the paper as if it might rearrange itself into innocence if she held still enough. Martin was making notes now, fast and ugly. Vivian sat very straight, saying nothing, eyes on Serena. Then came the timeline. Serena stood and moved to the monitor at the end of the room. She did not grandly pace. She simply pressed a key and brought up a clean chronology. March 4, 2006, she said. Samuel Sterling funds Nathaniel Sterling's custodial reserve at First National for educational and transitional support. August 3, 2007, direct tuition payment from Sterling Urban Holdings. July 29, 2008, second direct tuition payment. February 18, 2011, insurance claim for counseling services. March 16, 2011, reimbursement from custodial reserve coded as dependent care. March 12, 2016, internal memo from Vivian Sterling's office instructing use of prior dependent language for reserve cleanup. She clicked. November 21, last year. Samuel Sterling admitted after first stroke. November 23. Routing slip to First National Private Banking referencing custodial reserve reconciliation materials. November 25. Second stroke. Another click. January 9 this year. Petition filed by Nathaniel Sterling seeking trust accounting. Last Sunday. Written demand by Vivian Sterling to Nathaniel Sterling in the amount of $347,218.44, paired with waiver of future inquiry. She turned back to the table. That timeline, she said, shows repeated duplicate charging, probable premeditation, and an extortionate use of a false debt during a contested estate matter. Gregory slammed a palm on the walnut. Extortion is absurd. Owen didn't even look at him. Then you may prefer conversion, false accounting, tax misstatement, or fiduciary breach. We're flexible on vocabulary. Denise made a small, involuntary sound that might have been a laugh if fear had not caught it halfway out. Vivian's gaze cut to her. It was the first time my mother realized Denise was not merely present. It was also the first time I saw actual alarm move across her face. Denise, she said softly with terrifying sweetness, I'm surprised to see you here. Denise set the untouched coffee cup down. Her fingers trembled once. Then stilled. I'm sure you are. Martin turned to look at her, and in that instant I watched 3 separate calculations happen across the table. Vivian recalculating loyalty. Martin recalculating exposure. Gregory recalculating blame. Serena said, Ms. Holloway is prepared to testify regarding approval procedures, directive language and attempted destruction of accounting materials after our preservation letter was served. Gregory's head whipped toward Vivian. Destruction. Martin said, Vivian. Just that. Her name. Flat. Damning. Vivian kept her eyes on Denise. You were a clerical employee. I was the person who kept your house from swallowing itself, Denise said quietly. And I was the person you planned to sacrifice. Camille turned to her mother, shocked. Mom. Vivian ignored her again. This woman is disgruntled. She was terminated for performance issues. Denise reached into her bag and passed Serena a folder. Serena opened it and distributed copies. Inside were emails. From Vivian. From Gregory. One of them instructed Denise to pull reserve cleanup packets and purge duplicates before review. Another, from Gregory, said, use the old Nathan language. He never reads the details. A third, sent after my petition, read, if asked, these were household supports advanced by V, and never reconciled. Camille made a low sound in her throat and pushed back from the table. No, she said. No. Mom, what is this? Vivian's composure cracked not with volume but with contempt. Sit down, Camille. Camille did not sit down. Did you use my brother's trust to cover household spending? Everything in this family was household spending. That's not an answer. Gregory cut in. Don't start acting righteous now. You benefited from that house too. Camille turned on him. What does that mean? It means none of us lived in a vacuum. There was the fracture line opening. Martin removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. I need separate counsel to be considered for everyone in this room if this continues. Serena replied, that would be wise. Vivian finally looked at me. Not at the documents. Not at Serena. At me. You did this. No, I said. You did this neatly enough that all I had to do was line the pages up. She smiled then, a thin thing with no warmth in it. Your father would despise what you're doing. I held her gaze. My father hid the records where you couldn't get them. The silence after that was clean and brutal. Gregory pushed his chair back and stood. I'm not sitting here while she rewrites 20 years of family bookkeeping into a crime scene. Owen said mildly, no one needs to rewrite anything. The entries speak. Gregory rounded on Martin. You told us family reimbursement language was normal. Martin's face hardened. I told Vivian to regularize prior advances if there were any. I did not advise manufacturing debt demands in the middle of probate. Vivian turned with disbelief so sharp it almost looked young. Do not do this. Martin stared back. I am already doing this. Camille sat down very slowly as if her legs no longer trusted the floor. How much? She asked no one in particular. How much of this was real? Owen answered because truth is cruelest when it stays procedural. At minimum, the matched amount is $347,218.44. If broader duplicate charging across reserve years is included, potential exposure exceeds $1.2 million before penalties, tax consequences or estate remedies. Camille covered her mouth. Gregory swore. Vivian didn't move. That was always her talent. She could go completely still at the center of impact, like porcelain refusing to acknowledge the crack running through it. Serena returned to the head of the table and placed one final folder in front of Martin. This contains our draft settlement framework, she said. Resignation of Vivian Sterling from all fiduciary positions connected to the trust and foundation. Consent to independent forensic accounting. Immediate repayment into the estate-controlled reserve of the invoiced amount, plus provisional holdback pending full review. Written admission that the Sunday demand was improper and not a valid debt. Mutual non-contact except through counsel. If signed today, we pause public filing beyond what the court already has. If not, by close of business Monday we amend our petition, seek emergency relief and make referrals. Gregory laughed once. Wildly. Referrals to who? Serena's expression didn't change. Tax authorities. Probate court. Potentially the district attorney depending on what the accounting shows. Martin read the first page of the framework with visible haste. Vivian didn't touch hers. I'm not signing a confession, she said. Serena folded her hands. Then sign a resignation and repayment agreement. We can let discovery produce the confession for you. That landed. Denise looked down at the table. Camille stared at the wall. Gregory began pacing behind his chair, each turn shorter than the last, his anger burning down into pure fear. Then came the line I think finally broke whatever was left of the old family arrangement. Camille looked at me and asked, voice fraying, did you really know all along? I answered her calmly. Not all along. Just long enough. Gregory stopped pacing. You set us up. I turned to him. I made sure you'd find exactly what I wanted you to find. He frowned, confused. The email, I said. The one asking for any amount the family believed I owed before the hearing. I knew you'd want a number big enough to shame me and specific enough to frighten me. I wanted the specific number. I wanted it in her signature. I wanted you to authenticate your own theft. Martin let out a breath so long it sounded tired all the way down to the spine. Denise closed her eyes. Camille's shoulders folded inward. Vivian looked at me with something I had spent most of my life waiting for and never expected to see. Not love. Respect. Rage-fed. Temporary. But real. You've been pretending to be weak for years, she said. No, I replied. You just needed me to be. Another silence. Then Martin pushed the settlement framework toward Vivian. Take 10 minutes, he said. I don't need 10 minutes. Yes, he said more firmly now. You do. He stood and moved toward the glass wall, beckoning Gregory with him. Gregory went, still muttering. Camille remained seated but turned away from the table, staring out at the blurred city beyond the smoked glass. Denise stayed where she was, eyes lowered. Serena reviewed one note and said nothing. Owen capped his pen. My mother and I sat opposite each other in the polished quiet. This was the first time in my life I had faced her in a room she did not own, with records she could not reorder, and witnesses who did not depend on her invitations. She looked older than she had at brunch. Not physically. Structurally. As if some invisible support inside her had shifted. You enjoyed this, she said at last. No. That's disappointing. You finally win something and you can't even savor it. I'm not here to win. I'm here to stop you. Her eyes narrowed. You always were your father's son in the least useful ways. I almost smiled. And whose useful ways are these? That got me the briefest flicker at the corner of her mouth. Not amusement. Recognition. When Martin returned, he no longer pretended this could be massaged back into family language. We signed the resignation, repayment, audit consent and non-contact today, he said. We reserve positions on disputed intent pending accounting. Camille signs nothing. Gregory signs only as to preservation and separate entities under his control if implicated. I will not advise beyond that without conflicts review. Coward, Vivian said. Professional, Martin answered. Gregory threw both hands up. This is unbelievable. I married into a foundation, not a criminal enterprise. Camille laughed then. A short, broken sound. That's rich. He rounded on her. Don't start. She stared back at him with a new flatness. You build kitchen remodels to Dad's charitable account in 2022. His face changed. Tiny. But enough. Oh my God, she whispered to herself. Not because he denied it. Because he didn't. The next 30 minutes were paperwork and collapse. There is nothing cinematic about signatures. That's why they matter. People imagine justice as declarations, doors slamming, cameras flashing. More often it is black ink on heavy paper, a hand shaking once before it writes its own name. Vivian signed first. Not because she yielded fastest. Because she understood sequence faster than the others. She knew once the room turned procedural, emotion had already lost. She read every page. Corrected one date. Initialed each margin in hard, precise strokes. When she reached the repayment acknowledgement, her jaw set. Then she signed that too. Gregory resisted longer, demanded changes he couldn't justify, threatened countersuits that no one answered, and finally signed the preservation terms with the anger of a man who had confused proximity to power with ownership of it. Martin initialed as to receipt and separate representation concerns. Camille refused to sign anything she wasn't legally required to sign and asked for independent advice. Serena approved that immediately. When it was over, the room felt colder. Papers were stacked. Copies were exchanged. Owen gathered exhibits. Denise sat very still, hands in her lap, as if bracing for impact that had already passed. Vivian rose and buttoned her coat. At the door she paused. I thought she might say something grand. A curse. A prediction. Something about betrayal or blood or the price of public humiliation. Instead she said, "You always did know how to make a mess look tidy." I stood as well. "For what it's worth," I said, "you were right to keep receipts." That was the line that finally got her. Not because it was loud. Because it was hers. She left without another word. 6 months later, I was drinking coffee barefoot in a kitchen filled with morning light. The new apartment was in Brooklyn Heights, on the top floor of a brick building with old oak floors and wide windows that caught the East River in strips of silver every morning. Vivian Sterling resigned from the Sterling Family Foundation, from the board of the Ashcroft Museum, and from 2 hospital committees whose newsletters had once featured her in flattering half-profile beside words like stewardship and legacy. The society pages handled her fall with the kind of silk-gloved cruelty only old money circles truly master. They never said scandal. They said transition. They never said forced out. They said stepping back. But everyone heard the blood under it. Gregory Hale was removed from 2 development partnerships after the accounting review exposed a side trail of facility consulting fees routed through a company he controlled. The country club he treated like a cathedral suspended his membership pending ethics review. which in his world was the social equivalent of being escorted out under fluorescent light. Last I heard, he was spending his Thursdays in a Westchester office park trying to convince second-tier contractors that his name still opened doors. Martin Heller survived, technically. Men like Martin often do. But the firm name on the frosted glass changed 3 months later, and not in the order he expected. He faced a bar complaint, an internal inquiry, and the slow professional death that comes when people keep taking your meetings but stop taking your reassurance. There are careers that end with headlines. His ended with shorter handshakes. Aunt Joanna did what women like Joanna always do when a dynasty cracks. She rebranded herself as having been privately concerned for years. Unfortunately for her, there were emails. Not criminal ones. Just tasteless ones. Enough to leak into the correct circles. Enough that charity luncheons stopped seating her near microphones. Camille's consequences were stranger. More human. More painful in ways nobody outside the family would fully understand. Her wellness brand lost 3 sponsorships after reporters dug into how certain creative retreat expenses had been covered by family entities under review. She disappeared from social media for 2 months. When she came back, the filters were gone. So were the captions about Grace. She started teaching Pilates at a small studio in Cobble Hill. Last I heard, she liked the work more than the attention. As for Vivian, the house on 72nd was sold before spring. Not because she was poor. Nothing so dramatic. But because old power hates being watched in old rooms. Too many staff had heard too much. Too many corners held the shape of the story. She moved to a smaller apartment on 5th with a doorman and better discretion. I know this not because I asked, but because people tell you things once your family stops being untouchable and starts being educational. The messages came for a while. At first they were threats. From Gregory, "You have no idea what collateral damage you've caused." From Vivian, through counsel, "Any attempt to distort the confidentiality provisions will be met with immediate action." Then they became bargaining. From Camille, "Can we please just talk once without lawyers?" From Gregory again, "Your mother would consider a private reset if you stop speaking to Denise." Then they shifted into something sadder. One night at 1:14 a.m., Vivian left a voicemail. Her voice was low, perfectly controlled except for 1 second at the end when it wasn't. "I miss the version of you who still knew what family meant." I archived it without responding. Camille texted on Father's birthday, "I miss him. I don't know what to do with that now." I answered that 3 hours later. "Neither do I." It was the first honest exchange we'd had in years. As for me, I built something. Not out of vengeance. Out of recognition. When you spend months tracing the way money can be used to rearrange memory, to punish dependence, to disguise coercion as generosity, you begin to understand how many people are living inside stories someone else has itemized for them. Estate abuse. Family company blackmail. Loans.